Grown-up themes ahead. Intimacy, desire, and the vulnerable bits. Not for younger readers. Read gently at your own pace. So begins a new book, a collection of short nonfiction stories covering everything from asexuality to masturbation to polyamory. It's out this week, not coincidentally, just in time for Valentine's Day. Here to talk about Pillow Talk, real people, real stories, real awkward, is co-editor Heather Hendrie. Welcome.
Thanks, John. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you with us today. Easy question to get us going. What inspired this book and what is the goal exactly?
Well, all credit goes to the co-editor, Angelina Jimenez, who approached me about a year ago and said, "Hey, you're writing anthologies on taboo topics. The one we've got to do is about sex. So buckle up." And I found it edgy. I wasn't quite ready, but she led the charge, and here we are.
Now, in your introduction, you write, sex isn't a bad word, eroticism isn't sinful, but we are conditioned to believe that they are. Why are these subjects so difficult to broach even now, even in 2026?
I know it's a really interesting question. And in my day job as a clinical counselor, there's certain taboo areas that we kind of ignore to our detriment. And something I read a long time ago was that cultures tend to choose swear words that circle around the most taboo topics of that culture. So interestingly, my partner's from Quebec. The swear words in Quebec, if you will notice, all circle around the church and religion. And then in English speaking North America, for the most part, our words have to do with bodily functions and sex. So why is that? I couldn't tell you. There's just certain rules that we've come up with as a culture about what we talk about, what we don't, what's permissible, what isn't. And again, I would suggest that that's to our detriment.
Now, it seems like one of the goals then is to break down stigma by pushing at these age-old boundaries.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We like to say that we're smashing stigma through storytelling, and we do it in what I'd like to say a playfully provocative way. So we use humor and real people's experiences to play at the edges of what conversations are socially acceptable. So really, the larger mission is to foster conversation around things that matter that have historically not had a lot of airtime.
It seems like there's a narrow band of what is permissible in quote unquote polite society and what isn't.
Yeah, definitely. And it depends based on the culture you're raised in. You know, I grew up in the more waspy, stiff upper lip, sweep things under the rug culture. So it's actually quite edgy for me that I've landed in this position, leading awfully hilarious into conversations about the very cringy. I like to say that this genre that we're exploring, we would call it cringe lit.
All right. Well, that's a good jumping off point because the book has stories with titles like Menage a Moi, rhymes with tennis, and Young, Hot, and Infertile. What makes a good story for a collection like this?
Yeah, so really, these are funny stories. They're all true stories, and they're generally submitted by writers who are sharing a story in public for the first time. So they've been very courageous about it. They've put their names to their stories. But what makes a good story for Awfully Hilarious is that there's something that was a bit awful that over time, with the supportive community, the writer has grown through and wants to share the lesson that came from it. So we could go as far as saying sort of trauma to transcendence. But for example, the story Young, Hot, and Infertile was brought forward by Claire Losey to talk about her experience with trying to conceive a baby and how very taboo that subject has been in our culture, and as a result, how very alone and difficult it was for them as a partnership.
Now, what do you look for when you choose a story for a book like this one? You touched on it earlier, some element of cringe, some element of truth, but is there any other overarching sort of criteria that warrants inclusion in a book like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love to be as inclusive as possible. And we are specifically prioritizing and amplifying the stories and voices that haven't been heard as much in mainstream publishing. So those might be stories that were silenced or told in back rooms in the past. We're really looking for a very diverse range of experience and diverse experiences on behalf of the writers. So for the most part, again, I mentioned that most of these writers hadn't been published before. And so we're also looking for a really good story and we're also looking for humor, but we're looking for something where the person has navigated and grown through the experience that was thrown at them. So it's not just what happened, but it's what they've done with what happened and the story that they're here to tell about what happened in order to help others who the feedback we get a lot, John, is people will pick up these stories. Like the first one with Awfully Hilarious was called The Stories We Never Tell, about dating disasters, moments when you would want to come unhinged off of these dating apps. And people are writing their stories, and then the reader will read it and think, OMG, same. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm not alone out there. Thank goodness I'm not alone. So it's giving people a breath of fresh air in moments where they'd otherwise feel pretty isolated. And we do that through the vulnerability and connection, and of course, the humor.
So by putting these stories out there, you normalize this. You make you
Exactly.
make it seem that you're not alone with this.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. And again, a lot of this for me stems from my day work as a clinical counselor, where I'm in a privileged position of holding people's very vulnerable stories and moments. And these are not the stories of my clients, obviously, but I do feel like it's an advocacy arm and extension of my work through True Nature Wilderness Therapy as a counselor, is that it's about connecting with one another, normalizing these moments, and recognizing some of the universality in these pain points, such that we're not having to carry them alone.
Do you get your patients to write things down, to journal, to do what these folks have done and put their
Yeah,
story out
great
there?
question. Not often. I mean, if I'm working with somebody who's a writer, of course, I encourage them to bring it into their art, or perhaps they're a painter. I truly believe art can be very healing, and it's a way that we can transform, or I could even use the word transmute, something very painful into something that begins to feel purposeful or supportive of others. So no, it's not part of my therapeutic practice necessarily, unless that's an artistic medium that really sings to the person I'm working with.
Now you touched upon this earlier, but many of the authors in this collection are unpublished. So is that what you kind of go for? Unpublished writers, novice, pro, published, unpublished, or do you run the gamut there?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. So it's really not necessarily unpublished writers, but what we were specifically looking for was the story, not necessarily their experience with writing. So we worked with a great editor, Darcy Friesen Hossack, alongside Tidewater Press, and we took stories that sometimes were quite a raw form, and then these authors had an opportunity, many of them for the first time, to work with an editor to polish a story to the point that it was ready to be included in an anthology like this.
Were there any stories that were deemed too racy for the book or had to be toned down? Where do you draw the line with something like this? Because some of these
Great
stories get
question.
pretty out there.
Great question. So nothing too racy, nothing too taboo for Awfully Hilarious. Absolutely not. And there were some stories, for example, about sexual exploration happening in other countries that might have been dangerous to the participants if they were published as is. And so there were names changed, locations changed in order to protect people in zones where these conversations are so taboo, it could result in quite significant punishment. So that's the only thing we did there. We really don't censor or leave anything off the page. That's why I love the content warning that you spoke to, is that we invite people in gently, but to take care of themselves through the process. And they might find something pretty juicy on those pages. And I mean, for example, Jeffrey Graves' amazing story about his experience. I think he was in elementary school with a very, very shy, uncomfortable sex ed teacher, and kind of what unfolded there. So some of them are also, I'd say, quite PG, but you proceed with caution. It's not necessarily the thing you'd buy for your kids.
Now, you say one of the best ways of undermining harmful narratives is through storytelling and humor. Is there an example of a story in the book in particular that does a good job of busting down those harmful myths and stereotypes?
I think they all do that in their different ways. And they cross like quite diverse subject areas. So each one, like for example, as I was mentioning, Claire Losey's story, what she's really naming around the experience, the difficulty around conception, fertility, infertility. There's some really excellent work. Kate Heskett has an excellent story called Pineapples in the Snow, about an exploration, a joyful, playful exploration in polyamory up in Whistler. And that's really an edgy zone, and we're really, really excited to publish it because there's so little conversation about that at the moment in the mainstream. So that's one that stands out to me, actually. If we were just to pick one, I'd probably speak to Pineapples in the Snow.
Yeah, that one was particularly racy. Yes. Who is this book for, and what do you hope the reader gets out of it?
Yeah, it's for everyone. And we specifically published it around Valentine's Day because we're hoping to normalize sexuality, pleasure, eroticism, desire as a really important part of who we are as alive and human. And what we hope that people get out of it is an experience of feeling seen, connected, validated in their own experience, or maybe they'll be exposed to an experience that is new to them, but they start to gain a little bit of insight, excitement, understanding.
Okay. The name of the book is Pillow Talk, Real People, Real Stories, Real Awkward. It's available from Tidewater Press. My thanks to co-editor Heather Hendrie.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be here.